Thank you everybody who is here tonight. Thank you to everyone who's supporting tennis and creating atmospheres like this. It's really the pleasure of my life to experience these things.
Alex, an absolute pleasure. We'll see you.
10,000 people just went quiet at the exact same second. Not because someone told them to. Not because the match ended. Because the one person they all came for was walking off the court. And somewhere in that walk, something in the building died. What happens to a stadium when the only reason it's full disappears in under an hour and a half? What happens to a tournament when its biggest star isn't even ranked in the top 10? And what happens to a sport that suddenly realizes it built its whole moment on a 21-year-old who was never supposed to be the story in the first place? Stay with me because this one gets stranger the deeper you go. 3 nights earlier, Toronto didn't feel like Toronto. It felt like someone had airlifted a piece of Manila and dropped it inside a Canadian tennis stadium. Flags everywhere. Families who had never watched a professional match in their lives, standing in line for hours, phones out, chanting a name before she'd even walked onto the court. A grown man in an inflatable dinosaur costume, dancing like his life depended on it, because Alex was about to be introduced. Vendors scrambling to add a Filipino dish to the menu mid-tournament, something that had never happened in the event's history. And center court, a place usually reserved for legends, handed over to a 21-year-old ranked outside the top 20, because organizers had no other choice. She sold out a Wednesday night session in 30 minutes. 30 minutes. The only other player believed to have done that in the last 20 years is Serena Williams. Read that again because it matters for what comes next. 3,100 tickets moved the moment her match got confirmed. Not over a week. Not over a day. The moment it was announced, phones started ringing and didn't stop. The tournament director would later admit, almost helplessly, that they physically could not put her anywhere except the biggest court they had, because smaller courts couldn't hold what she was pulling in. This wasn't a rising star having a good week. This was something closer to gravity. And gravity, as it turns out, has a cruel habit of disappearing without warning. So picture this. Sunday night, same stadium, same energy that had been building for 3 straight days, thick enough to feel on your skin. And then, in the space of 73 minutes, it's gone. A Swiss veteran named Belinda, calm, composed, almost unbothered by the noise around her, methodically takes the match apart. 6-4, 6-love, a bagel in the second set, the kind of scoreline that doesn't just end a match, it ends a mood. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because Belinda isn't the villain here. She's not even trying to be. She's just a professional doing her job extremely well, in front of a crowd that wasn't cheering for her. And when it's over, she doesn't gloat. She stands there, mic in hand, and says something almost apologetic. She knows who they came for. She says it plainly, that she understands most of the crowd was rooting for her opponent, but she's grateful they showed up anyway. It's a gracious thing to say. It's also, in its own quiet way, devastating, because it confirms what everyone in that building already suspected. They weren't there for tennis. They were there for her, for Alex. And now Alex is gone. Watch what happens next, because this is where the story stops being about a tennis match. The stadium doesn't empty out slowly. It empties out like air leaving a balloon. Flags that had been draped over railings for 3 nights start coming down, folded, packed into bags. The line at the food stall selling Filipino adobo, a line that had wrapped around the corner every single night, just isn't there anymore. Reporters who had covered this tournament for years start describing something they've genuinely never seen before. A crowd noise so loud it sounded like a Grand Slam final, replaced within minutes by the sound of footsteps on empty concrete. One fan posts online, almost in disbelief at their own memory, that they still can't process how a stadium sold out 3 nights running because of one player. The amazement is still there. It's just curdled into something sadder, because everyone in that building just watched a phenomenon end in real time, and none of them are sure it's coming back. Now here's the part that should genuinely unsettle anyone who runs a tennis tournament for a living. Before Alex ever set foot in Toronto, this event was already successful. 9 of the top 10 ranked players in the world were competing. Attendance was strong. Projections had the tournament contributing close to $60 million to the local economy. On paper, this was a healthy, thriving, well-oiled machine. And then one 21-year-old walked in, and the machine didn't just run better. It transformed into something else entirely. The tournament had drawn its highest attendance ever the year before, and this year, with her in the draw, it was on pace to smash that number. Not because the top players were suddenly more exciting. Not because ticket prices dropped. Because of her, one person, reshaping the trajectory of an entire event that had existed for years before she ever played a point in it. That's not a fun fact. That's a warning sign. And somewhere in a boardroom, someone is very quietly starting to sweat. Let's talk about why. Because the why is where this gets emotional instead of just statistical. Over 270,000 Filipino Canadians live in the Greater Toronto area alone. For years, professional tennis has tried, in fairly clumsy ways, to diversify its audience, to pull in communities that never felt like the sport was built for them. And then Alex showed up, fresh off a career-defining title, and did in 1 week what marketing departments hadn't managed in a decade. Families who had never watched tennis in their lives bought tickets. Senior citizens who'd never been inside that stadium showed up early just to get a seat. A performing arts group filled an airport terminal with traditional music the moment she landed, like she was returning home instead of arriving in a foreign country. One fan group co-founder described the atmosphere inside that stadium as feeling unmistakably like being back in Manila. Not similar to, not reminiscent of, like actually being there. That's not typical sports enthusiasm. That's identity. That's a community seeing itself reflected on a stage it had never been invited onto before, and refusing to let the moment pass quietly. And that's exactly why the silence after her loss hit so differently. It wasn't just disappointment. It was grief for something that had, for 3 nights, felt like belonging. Now follow this thread carefully, because it's the twist nobody saw coming. Belinda, the player who ended the run, isn't just quiet by circumstance. She actually prefers it that way. There's a well-documented moment from a match the year before, where she visibly lost her patience with a noisy, overly excited crowd, snapping at a rival player's box to be quiet, later complaining directly to the umpire about the noise. This is a player who plays better in silence, who is, in some strange twist of fate, the exact opposite of everything the last 3 nights in Toronto represented. So when the tournament needed its biggest draw to keep rolling, the player standing in the way wasn't just skilled, she was almost thematically built to end the party. Calm against chaos, quiet against roar, and quiet won. Sit with that for a second, because it reframes everything that came before it. This wasn't just an upset. It was a collision between 2 completely different ideas of what tennis is supposed to feel like, and only one of them was walking away with the trophy hopes intact. Here's the uncomfortable question tournament directors are now whispering to each other, the one nobody wants to say on camera. What happens when your biggest draw isn't your best player? Because right now, across town, the men's tournament is dealing with its own crisis, missing several of its biggest names entirely, and struggling to fill seats without them. Meanwhile, the women's event, powered almost entirely by a 21-year-old ranked outside the top 20, was outselling everyone's expectations right up until the moment she lost. One tournament director admitted, almost bewildered by his own words, that he'd never seen a player ranked this far outside the top 5 have this kind of pull. Everyone in the industry, he said, is talking about it. What he didn't say, but what everyone in that room was thinking, is that this kind of pull is also terrifyingly fragile. Because stars like this, the ones who don't just win matches but move entire communities, don't come around often. And when they lose early, the whole business model built around them loses right alongside them. That's not a hypothetical anymore. That's exactly what just happened in Toronto, in real time, in front of 10,000 people who felt it happen. So where does that leave Alex herself, in the middle of all this noise about numbers and dependency and business models? Because somewhere in all of that, there's still a 21-year-old who just lost a tennis match. And what she said afterward is the part that actually stops you in your tracks. She didn't talk about the loss much at all. She talked about her people. She described herself, almost too humbly, as just a small piece of something much bigger, something that belongs to Filipinos and their pride in where they come from. She talked about learning, in that 1 week, just how passionate and multicultural and kind her community could be. How tennis had somehow become the unlikely stage for people to come together and celebrate everything they love about who they are. There's no bitterness in it, no excuse-making, just a quiet kind of awe, like she genuinely hadn't expected to become the reason a stadium in another country felt like home for 3 nights. And that, more than any ticket sales figure or attendance record, is the actual story here. Because now the entire sport is facing a decision it didn't see coming a month ago. Does it lean into this? Does it start adjusting schedules, court assignments, even food menus, around the reality that a 21-year-old outside the top 20 can outdraw players ranked far above her? Does it recognize that the next great growth market for tennis might not come from a new tournament in a new country, but from communities that were always there, just waiting for someone to finally represent them on a big enough stage? Or does it treat this like a one-week anomaly, a nice story to mention in a highlight reel, and quietly go back to business as usual the moment the flags come down and the stadium empties out? One well-known former player, watching all of this unfold from the outside, said it about as bluntly as it can be said. When a fourth-round match is drawing watch parties in arenas back home, that's not a curiosity anymore. That's a movement, and you'd be a fool not to get in on it. So think back to where we started. 10,000 people, silent, at the exact same second. Now you know why. Not because the tennis stopped being competitive. Not because the tournament failed. But because for 3 unforgettable nights, one player turned a professional sports event into something closer to a homecoming. And when she walked off that court, she didn't just take a match with her. She took the heartbeat of the entire building. The flags are folded now. The food stall line is gone. The stadium will fill up again for other matches, other nights, other names. But everyone who was there knows it won't feel the same. Not for a while. Maybe not until she's back on that court again. Because now they know exactly what it feels like when it's real. And nothing less is going to satisfy them ever again. And that right there is the real story tennis wasn't ready to tell about itself. The one this whole tournament just accidentally exposed to the entire world.